Hello friends, today we're going to discuss the top 10 threats to small businesses and what business owners can do to avoid these risks. Some of these things will include insurance, some will just be good best practices. But we're going to explain them all right now. Hi, Ryan Hanley here, founder and president of Rogue Risk, where we do insurance differently, specifically by giving you knowledge and information to make the right insurance decision. If you enjoy this video, if you find value, and you're watching on YouTube, please just tap that like button for us. That helps more business owners like yourself see that this video has value. Okay, so let's get into these 10 threats now. I have them kind of printed out on a sheet here. We're going to talk through them. Some of them I'm going to go through kind of quick. I want you to know that all of these things are very legitimate. They all impact both the sustainability and profitability of your business, some of which can be mitigated with insurance products, others not so much. But I'll explain which coverages you need to think about as we go through them. These risks are not in a particular order, so it's not like number 1 is the largest risk versus 10 or vice versa. It's just 10 risks, but let's go through them because they are incredibly important. All right, the first is protecting your property. Guys, this is straightforward. Things like locking up your property, having it particularly stowed in a way that it doesn't have exposure to water if that could damage it, or fire. Fire pretty much damages everything, or any other types of chemicals or corrosives or whatever. Protect your property. A good way to do so with insurance is having a good business owner's policy or standalone property policy. If the equipment is of a certain size or of a certain nature, then you're going to want to cover it with an inland marine policy. All things to be discussed with your insurance professional. The second is business interruption. This is where something happens and you can't operate your business, or you can't operate your business at the same level. So this could be a fire in your retail store that doesn't allow you to sell anymore, or a cyber attack that shuts down your e-commerce store, or any other related issue. Now, many of these things, if they're covered under a standard insurance policy, there will be business interruption coverage, which will give you either the full amount or some portion of lost revenue, etc. They'll pay you on an ongoing basis to make sure you can keep your business going despite that loss, but you need to have the coverage in place in order for business interruption to actually pick up. So business interruption is a big one. Liability losses. This could be as straightforward as slips, trips, and falls inside, say, a retail store. It could be professional liability exposures. It could be cyber liability exposures, directors and officers, employment practices. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of different liability exposures you could potentially have, many of which are going to be covered under a standardized, broad set of insurance coverages that relate to your business. But just make sure in talking through with your insurance professional that the ones that have the largest impact are covered specifically, and that ancillary ones are covered as well. You're not going to be able to cover every liability exposure possible, but you can get most of them under a good package policy for your business. But we want to be thinking about how liability exposures can impact us, where they are, and what policies cover them. All right, so that's 3. Number 4, key person losses. This is going to be key employees that are either recruited away from your business or, God forbid, get sick, disabled, or pass away. There are life insurance products that can help you if there's a disability or a loss of life, traditionally called key man, now really just called key person. Some companies haven't changed that language yet, but essentially they're the exact same thing. They have nothing to do with your gender. And that's a good way of capturing some potential issue there. Also, just be a good leader. Talk through with your team, understand what's happening. Not the easiest thing to do, I know, but managing your people and making sure you don't lose any of your key employees is a big part of running a small business, because there's always going to be that larger company that has a bigger budget who's trying to snipe off your best employees, and it's very difficult to maintain them if you don't understand what they need and want. Number 5, injuries to employees. The best way to cover this is going to be workers' compensation, maybe a short-term disability policy if you're in New York State, having ancillary medical benefits, long-term disability policy included if that's a benefit that you can afford and offer, and then just being preventative. Safety programs, talking about safety, making safety part of the culture of your business if you specifically have a physical related business, if you're in manufacturing or warehousing or trucking or even retail, right? Talking about safety and why it's so important, and then having process and procedures in place to keep your people safe. Very, very important. That's number 5. All right, the 6th biggest threat to small businesses, managing your electronic data and computer resources. Guys, have a cyber security plan, have a cyber liability policy. Right now, as you're watching this video, there are bots on the internet pinging, attacking, testing your website, your email server, any digital properties that you have, trying to either get into your database, get into your systems, or use your systems as a jump-off point to create more attacks. No one is safe. Every small business is being hit in the country right now. Like literally as you're watching this video, this is happening. So have a good cybersecurity policy in place, talk to your team, have multi-factor authentication in place, and have a cyber liability policy. It's too important these days. It's just absolutely too important. Environmental exposures. Not everyone has these, and not every company is going to have as large of an environmental exposure, but if you're in construction, contracting, transportation, warehousing, manufacturing in particular, environmental exposures are just becoming larger and more severe when they actually happen. And environmental liability policies, depending on your business, can range in price, they can range in coverage. But if this is an exposure you have, guys, please don't stick your head in the sand on environmental, because maybe it's a long shot that anything actually does happen, but if it does, these losses are huge and they can destroy a business. So if you have that exposure, make sure you're addressing it with some coverage as well as just good best practices. Employment practices. Well, I'm going to put employment practices liability video right here that you can click and watch. But this one, guys, 50%, more than 50% of all employment practices related claims in the United States happen in businesses with 50 or fewer employees, which means small business is a main driver of employment practices related liability claims, because there's not as much documentation, there's not as much standardization, hiring, firing, performance reviews, interaction with employees, interaction with management and staff, interaction with third-party consultants. All of that tends to not be as documented and standardized, and therefore employment practice related claims happen all the time. Huge, huge concern. There is a policy you can get. A lot of times you can add at least some coverage onto your standard business owner's policy. If you don't want a standalone policy, there's a lot of different options here. But again, do not bury your head in the sand with this coverage. All right, that was number 8. The last 2, contracts. Maybe this goes without saying, maybe it doesn't, but when you sign a contract, it's a contract. You are now held liable for what you said you would do in that contract. Now, when it comes to that, particularly if you're in the professional services business, professional liability is going to be the coverage that's going to respond if in a contract you said you would do something or there would be some result, etc., and that doesn't happen. If your experience, if your expertise is what you're delivering to someone, and there's damage done to that client or that individual because of your professional experience and expertise, that's a professional liability related claim. It oftentimes is tied to a contract because there was a guarantee or an expectation or an outcome that was expected that didn't happen. There are other places where contracts can come into play, for sure. That's a big one though, professional liability. All right, got to be careful of our contracts. Lastly, managing your supply chain. Guys, I'm not a supply chain expert, so I'm not going to try to give you some sort of advice here, but if you are dealing with goods that you are selling, retail, wholesale, etc., managing that supply chain, making sure that you have inventory, and then once you have that inventory, making sure that inventory is properly covered, whether it's through property, inland marine, or through a specific inventory coverage, is vital. Running a small business is hard, right? And small business is relative. I don't mean small in terms of size or importance. I just mean small in terms of what the general kind of industry, how the general industry looks at you versus say an enterprise level business like a Nike or an Apple or General Electric, etc. Right? So in this area, it's incredibly dynamic. As a business owner, you often have to wear 10, 15, 20 hats. I mean, I remember when I first started Rogue, that's exactly what was happening here. And it's difficult and it's a lot to think about. And if you want an insurance professional, if you want a conversation like this, if you want to have someone who's going to walk you through the coverages that are important to your business and make sure that you may not purchase every policy that you could potentially have based on your risk exposure, but at least you're making educated decisions, right? If that's what you want, then we're here to help. Give us a call, 518-960-6600. That's 518-960-6600. We work in all 50 states, so wherever you are, we can work with you. You can visit us online at roguerisk.com. You can email us at gorogue@roguerisk.com, or I'm sure there's a link or a button somewhere around this video that you contact us. Whichever way you choose, we look forward to working with you.